Nexus PMG welcomes you to the Bigger Than Us podcast, which we as energy geeks lovingly refer to as the BTU. Bigger Than Us is a podcast that focuses on ideas that will shape the future of our planet and ultimately our existence. We will occasionally lean into energy topics because, after all, it's the key to our collective survival. But we'll also explore other ideas and topics that we believe will have an impact that is bigger than us. And now, on to today's show. Hello, and welcome to the Bigger Than Us podcast. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I'd like to welcome Caye, Drapcho, and Terry Walker to the show. Dr. Caye Drapcho is an associate professor in the Biosystems engineering program at Clemson University in the Department of Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences. She is the past chair of the Clemson University Sustainability Commission. Dr. Drapcho teaches courses at the undergraduate and graduate level in biological kinetics and reactor modeling, heat and mass transfer in biological systems, and sustainable engineering design. My second guest is Dr. Terry Walker, who is a professor and graduate student coordinator of Biosystems engineering at Clemson University, with over 20 years of experience in sustainable bioprocessing. He obtained his PhD in Biosystems Engineering in 1997 at the University of Tennessee in cooperation with Oak Ridge National Laboratory. He was an assistant professor at LSU before arriving at Clemson as an associate professor in 2002. Caye, Terry, how are you guys doing today?
I'm doing very well, Raj. How about yourself?
Caye, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for asking. Terry?
Yes, doing very well.
And where are you both located?
Clemson, South Carolina, at Clemson University.
And we have a lot of Clemson people on our team, so I appreciate you joining us. How's the weather out there?
Oh, we've had wonderful weather. Well, maybe considering climate change may be abnormal, but it's been very warm, very warm and very nice.
It's one of those funny things, right? You kind of want to celebrate it, but not so much.
Right.
Well, I appreciate you joining, both professors at Clemson University. Caye, can you start off by, giving your role at the university?
Sure. I am an associate professor in the Biosystems engineering program, and I teach both at the undergraduate and graduate level a variety of courses dealing with fundamentals of our discipline, dealing with heat and mass transfer concepts, and also dealing with biological kinetics, mainly the way microorganisms grow and either treat and convert wastes or produce biofuel compounds or just grow their cells for the value that entails. And I also conduct research in those areas. So I focus on biological reactor design for biofuels, for carbon capture from the atmosphere through managed algae cultures, and in overall sustainable design.
And Terry?
Yes, I'm a professor as well at Clemson Biosystems Engineering. So I've been there for about 18 years or so now, moving from Louisiana State University originally, but work primarily in the sustainable bioprocessing area, very similar to what Caye had mentioned, and a big emphasis on carbon drawdown is kind of really a major thing for me right now. Also teach several courses in the sustainable bioprocessing area at both the undergraduate and graduate level. Also the graduate coordinator for the program.
So Terry, you've been there 18 years. How have you seen the interest change in the biofuels and perhaps even broader renewable fuels area?
Oh, yeah, there's been lots of changes. When I first started there, it really was almost no interest. And then suddenly, around 2005, the Energy Policy Act was passed, and they began to fund research in the area. In part, I think, to slip in the fracking clauses as well so they could promote natural gas. And they would use the renewable energy as a way to make it look good, the bill. Unfortunately, we suffered many years of EPA violations through the fracking industry. But at least as far as the Sustainable Biofuels Initiative, there was quite a bit of funding up until about 2012. A lot of that money has gone away, but it periodically comes back again. Meanwhile, the biofuels industry has been forging forward, and I work primarily in the biodiesel area, but also the ethanol area is a very popular one. But in the biodiesel area, even with lots of uncertainty, the companies continue to grow. So we're actually up to about 3 billion gallons per year. We're one of the largest producers of biodiesel in the world now. So we're competitive with Europe.
And Caye, what about in the classes that you've been teaching? How have you seen the interest among students grow?
Yeah, it's been increasing every year, and it's been so helpful to our morale as instructors. I recall one of the earlier years that I taught, the whole class essentially still felt that climate change was a political hoax, if you will. They did not, internalize the science or understand that the science was so valid. This was 15 years ago. And that was really a disappointing thing to encounter. And it made me realize we had to work even harder to educate the students that we were recruiting into our program about this crisis. And so that largely has resolved itself. I would say that the student body, even across disciplines at the university, now understands the science behind climate change and the dire threat that it poses. So that's been very encouraging.
Was there a specific turning point, or was it a slow change?
It felt like it was a slow change, but then there would be kind of sudden changes embedded in that. And Terry, who keeps up more with trends based on generational, cohorts, would say, "Oh yeah, I've read this study saying that this generation is now going to be, much more involved in this." And so I think we've seen that. I think it's been a combination of efforts across the university to raise awareness, but also what their prior education has focused on and really educated them on.
So, what are some of the efforts Clemson has made?
Well, within our program, it's been a priority from day one. I know for Terry and I. We were able to develop a course in renewable energy that was probably the first on campus that was on sustainable renewable energy. And now there's a variety of disciplines teaching a version with perhaps their emphasis or their strength emphasized. We have a large group of students interested in sustainability. So we really embed that in all of our courses in our discipline. And then throughout the university, a sustainability minor was developed, and that's been quite popular. So I think all of those efforts coalesce to really improve the background and the awareness that the students have.
So Terry, Caye mentioned that, you keep track of trends. Have you seen any Have you seen any specific turning points, or was it a slow change for you too?
Yeah, I would say that it was fairly slow, unfortunately. We really needed to act really around 2005 or 2006 when The Inconvenient Truth came out. And people became aware of James Hansen, Dr. James Hansen, who has been adamantly trying to get big changes to take place at that point, and is still very active as well. But the message has gotten across, particularly with the younger generations, and the Sunrise Movement is a good example of that. I give a lot of credit to the young people that have been very politically active there. And they're also voting. That's another really interesting thing. Now that the millennial millennial generation is the largest generation in the history of humans. They are actually voting too for really the first time that young people voted. It's been fairly dismal throughout our history when it comes to young people. And it's very unfortunate because it's their future and they're the ones that are going to be leading the future. So for them not to vote or get their say in there, I think is tragic. But fortunately, really starting in 2018, I would say, they really did come out to vote for the first time. And it looks like they're doing it again. And I think it's moving to the next generation, the Gen Z, I guess, and then there's a Gen Alpha is coming soon. So this is an exciting period to see them actually starting to take the lead because my generation has been, unfortunately, a major failure and not really taking this seriously. And the fact that we're the leaders at the moment, we're generally the ones that are leading most of major government operations and also major corporations to not be taking this extremely serious. We're really in a serious climate emergency now. And James Hansen made us very aware of that back in 2005, basically said that by 2020, if we haven't acted, it'll be too late. So we're right here at 2020. And now we have apparently just 7 years really to do something.
So Terry, let's speak to, quote unquote, your generation for a moment. I did my MBA back in 2008. And I remember during the MBA, we read a book by a gentleman by the name of Andrew Winston. And I think it was called Green to Gold and maybe Green Recovery. There were two books. Mm-hmm. And there was a slight mention regarding, in the class regarding climate change and global warming. But there was a certain segment of the cohort that, grew up under this Friedman economic style, if you will, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. Uh-huh. And so their thinking was tied very strongly to that. So, and there were some companies that were mentioned in the book that were, taking a stand back in 2008, 2010. I think Unilever may have been one of them, but I might be misspeaking. But what do you think, perhaps, let's just say your generation or people that are further along in their careers can maybe tie themselves to now to be part of this change?
Well, it will be critical that we are part of this change because we don't have any time left. So it's really going to take all the generations at this point working together to make this happen with their different levels of power. Of course, the young generation who are going to take over in the next 10 to 20 years are key to the whole thing. But we really only have 7 years left to do something. At a rate of 50 gigatons of CO2 per year of emissions, it's just unacceptable. And it's actually accelerating. So we have to go exactly the opposite direction. We are seeing some of this being talked about, obviously, through Paris Accord and finally getting the countries to agree. But to actually take action is the next step, and the action is not happening at this point. And I think it would be very interesting this year to see what happens in the climate conference that comes up.
I agree. It will be interesting. Caye, to you, Terry mentioned future generations and perhaps some of the things that we can engage in as our current generation, but what are some opportunities you see for students, and how do you speak to your students about those opportunities?
Well, I try to frame it as what we can do now where, in addition to activism to change policy, which is extremely important in what Terry has been discussing, but also to really adopt the lifestyle changes that if we all adopted would have a substantial difference. And many times I think students think everything's expensive. They're a student. They can't put PV panels on their dorm rooms, et cetera. So we really try to focus on the personal lifestyle changes that can have an impact and reducing your own carbon and ecological footprint. And I think that is really the number of online tools to do those calculations has really helped students think about their own purchases, their food purchases, what they consume, what they discard, how they get to and from classes. All of those really matter. And so I think that has been one tool that I've, and I know Terry does the same, to really help students think about what they can do on an individual basis. And I try to practice what I preach, and I brag about it when it's successful, or I make a joke about it if it's something that I think they might think is corny, like hanging your laundry outside on a clothesline, which I have the ability to do because I don't live in a subdivision that might preclude that. But I also try to talk to them about, like, how can we change those rules? Coal power plants and the pollution that is released is pretty unsightly. I don't mind seeing a neighbor's laundry on their line. I think that's a good thing. So we talk about a variety from very small actions to large actions. But I think that helps relieve some frustration also, because you can feel paralyzed by the lack of activity by institutions. And I think it's really important for students and everybody to embrace what they can do on an individual basis.
And what about opportunities in the workforce from a career standpoint, based on the assumption that the students are coming through your classes to eventually get a job in particular sectors? How do you advise them regarding getting a job and perhaps what sectors to look at?
Oh, I started out to teach a sophomore level class. So we have professional development as one of the explicit objectives of that class. And I have a cumulative list since 2007 when I first joined. It started with 2007. I joined in 2003. But of our graduates and the jobs, not every single graduate, but those that chose to let me know where they had gotten employment. And I present that to our students and say, look at these great companies that are doing work in the bioprocessing area or in the ecological engineering area. And I think that really helps kind of let them be familiar with local opportunities or nationwide job opportunities. And then we really focus in one of the other sophomore classes on bringing back our alumni for invited talks. And I think that's really helpful. One example is a student that was on one of my creative inquiry teams the first year that I offered it on oyster reef restoration, because it's a global issue that we've over-harvested our oyster reefs. And the student was on that team. Then she did that project for her senior design. And now she's working in California for a consulting firm doing, guess what? Living shorelines and oyster reef restoration work. And really, it's been so exciting to watch that progression of activities and to feel good about perhaps giving her that spark of interest.
And Terry, before I come to you with the same question, Caye, can you share what creative inquiry is?
That's an undergraduate research initiative that was developed under our prior provost, Dory Helms, to encourage students to be involved with discovery, traditional research, field activities, and really pursue projects that they're interested in. So in our example, it's a pass-fail course, 1 credit. It's not meant to add to their burden of homeworks and exams. It's meant to just get their exposure, give them exposure to researchable questions and how we can really approach them, and to be fun, frankly, to show how interesting and engaging research can be.
It sounds really interesting. And do you have a particular framework that you follow for that?
No, I think the benefit of this is that there's no framework. It can really be, there's hundreds of creative inquiry classes now at Clemson, and they're as different as night and day in the approach that the different faculty have taken. And I think that students can kind of meander their way through and find what they're interested in. And it's been really a fun activity. I think Terry... excuse me. I was just going to say, I think Terry might have been in the first inaugural class of the creative inquiry participants.
Yep.
Well, I might lean on both of you offline so I can maybe figure out how I can get my kids into that creative inquiry mode.
Oh, yes. No problem.
So, Terry, same question to you regarding some of the opportunities you see for your students and perhaps some of the advice you would give them.
Yes, I mean, starting with that creative inquiry, I was just lucky to find out about that from another colleague, and he had submitted a proposal. So I kind of submitted one with him, and we actually built our whole sustainable pilot facility there. A number of universities have done this, where they take their waste vegetable oil and convert this over to biofuel, to biodiesel. And it displaces the amount of diesel fuel that comes into campus, and then ultimately displaces the carbon dioxide. So kind of a win-win sort of technology. And this is really, a lot of our students have taken this to creative inquiry since, and many have moved on to the industry. So I have to have a shout out to Sam Wolf, who works with you. She was a really great student, who's now clearly doing sustainable things. So this was really my hope, ultimately, with the initiation of that program.
So both of you have been involved in, let's call it broadly, the biofuels. But if you were to, let's say, pick 2 or 3 technologies that you're extremely hopeful for, let's say in the next 10 years, which technologies would they be and why? And Caye, I'll start with you.
Well, I have to say hydrogen gas, and that has kind of waxed and waned in terms of funding, in terms of national interest in it. But it appears to be resurging with more interest in it. And it's a clean burning biofuel. It can be produced from a variety of sustainable methods. I focus in my research lab on producing it from biological fermentation, because that's my love and my passion is anything microbial. But it really can be the electrolysis of water, cleaving of water into hydrogen gas and oxygen has been also focused on, again, as a storage fuel with the excess electricity from wind and solar. And so rather than storage in a battery, you could store hydrogen gas. So I think that it has a lot of potential. And what we're focusing on is everything in biosystems is looking at the cycle. And so if you have waste agricultural products that are not being utilized, instead of discarding them, using the nutrients, the sugars in those foodstuffs to be converted to biofuels is what we really focus on. And so we've been in South Carolina. Peaches are a commodity crop that has a large discard rate certain times of the year, or just due to imperfections. And so those excess peaches can be fermented by bacteria to hydrogen gas. And I just think it's really exciting to see the novel approaches that microorganisms use. And if we just can discover those, then we can mimic them in engineered systems. So I got to say hydrogen gas.
Terry?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, solar is really doing quite well. It does need some improvement, but in general, it's fairly cheap, and it's already, the technology is there. But there is need for storage, and we are looking at hydrogen as a way for storage of energy for our natural gas power plant, that we're hopefully going to shift away from natural gas and go to either renewable natural gas, and then use of hydrogen as a way of storage. I think is really important, and obviously sustainable forms of hydrogen production are critical for that. The other area I think is extremely important that is just starting to get recognition is regenerative agriculture, and moving away from our factory type farming mechanisms, and also the tremendous amount of meat that people eat in this country, which is really unnatural. We've never evolved to eat the amount of 2 or 3 times a day where we're eating meat. There is a program that's trying to get people to just cut back to 1 meal per day, which I think is a good start. It actually took me 48 years to finally become vegan, after making excuse after excuse. But as far as the sustainability footprint, that is one of the most egregious is our meat consumption, particularly in the beef area. But being able to work these systems together into a regenerative agricultural type system is really absolutely a technology that has to happen, since we're looking at very large amounts of our greenhouse gases that are coming from the agriculture sector in the world. And this is another great area for potential drawdown of carbon too. We can very quickly pull carbon out of the atmosphere through an agricultural and forestry areas, since they naturally take carbon dioxide for their cycle. So bringing that back into a cyclic process that benefits us, I think, is a huge part of this solution.
I appreciate you both sharing that. Caye, we're getting to the crux of our conversation, the why behind what you do. What drew you to biosystems engineering?
I stumbled into it, frankly.
Creative inquiry?
Well, no, I mean, I was, when I was a child and then through high school, I was always passionate about feeding the world and saving the planet, saving the whales. That was the motto a long time ago. And I think biosystems is really the intersection of those, because as Terry mentioned, everything is cyclical. Everything that we eat, how we produce those foods, how we discard of the unused portion, it's all integrated. So the systems part of this is what I find so fascinating. It's like a puzzle. How can we figure out how to use everything that is a byproduct of a major, bioprocess? And that's just challenging. It's just interesting. And to go back to the prior question, I was going to add that, solar and wind are great sources of renewable energy, but they don't produce the byproducts that we actually need to produce our materials, textiles, pharmaceuticals, other compounds. So the whole biorefinery concept, where you're producing a biofuel, but yet also your materials that are now derived largely from petroleum, and a variety of compounds for industrial society can be produced in a biorefinery. So that's what attracts me and keeps me in this field. There's always new information that's being discovered that I just find fascinating.
And Terry, what led you to biofuels?
Kind of a similar story. Through the engineering area, I struggled in the first few years of whether I really wanted to become an engineer. After I started realizing that we have that kind of power to destroy things very quickly through innovation. And that's a lot of what we've done. I mean, we've produced the gasoline engine, and now it's become a disaster, extremely inefficient type of technology. Luckily, I think is going to go away with electric cars coming in. But even that, you've really got to watch out, because we can really accelerate the demise of the world. There's a lot of power in that, unfortunately. So that really did start leading me towards sustainable engineering. It wasn't really talked about much when I was going through school, which was very unfortunate. But it was a passion of mine, so I ended up staying in the engineering discipline to try to fight back, I guess you might say, to try to help these types of problems. And my first experience was working with extraction of food oils, so omega-3 fatty acids, those kind of things, and they were using hexane, which is a pretty horrible solvent. They still use that, actually, in the industry, but I wanted to get away from that, and we actually went to carbon dioxide as a way of sustainable extraction. So that was sort of the beginning of that in my PhD program, where I used supercritical fluids to try to get as involved into a biorefinery process as possible, and ultimately try to think about, again, closing the loop on the process. So you're not wasting, not taking natural resources and then wasting them, but actually getting them back into a cyclic uh, uh, function there. So we can either really destroy the planet very quickly, or we could potentially help save it, and that's my ultimate hope for what I've done.
Well, staying on the theme of helping, can you share what Greenlight South Carolina is and what the organization does?
Yes, that's a really great organization that was started by a musician, Andreas Hoffman, in New Orleans. So the actual parent company is Greenlight New Orleans. And I would highly, anyone that goes to New Orleans, I would um, volunteer. It's a volunteer type organization where you can go in to change out the light bulbs in typically homes of poverty to try to reduce their energy bill. And he's also moved in the area of making raised bed gardens. So you plant a raised bed garden at a house in New Orleans, um, and as well as rain barrels for collecting water. So you recycle your water through that system as well. So it's been a huge success. So I wanted to try to model that in South Carolina, and we actually set up a company here underneath his company in New Orleans, and to try to do the same thing in the Greenville area, primarily Greenville, Anderson, Clemson area. So we've been successful at changing out light bulbs, those type of things. But I would love to move to the next level of bringing in the more ecosystems type engineering into this.
You know, I think there's a lot of opportunity in that sector. I was speaking with a real estate developer last week, and she and I were discussing the opportunities to come in and retrofit homes, you know, from an efficiency standpoint to, like you said, lower the bills or the wallet share of the people that are living there and, you know, essentially make it a win-win.
Yes, absolutely. And plus, it's a
So,
great social event too. I mean, if that was one of the great things about his whole idea, was to get the volunteers involved directly with the people. So it wasn't something like where Duke Energy would just send a bunch of light bulbs out and hope that they install it. They actually, in this organization, they get the community really to come together, and you sort of learn from each other. So it's really just a fantastic organization. That's all I can say about it. I donate to it all the time, and will continue to do so.
and I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
So, Caye, it's
Yes.
2030, magic wand. What does the program look like, and what do you feel like? Oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. What does the program look like, and what do you hope students are asking for?
Well, I was thinking about my fall class that I teach in biological kinetics, and earlier when you were asking about students' attitudes and how they have changed, one thing that we don't just talk about, but we actually get the data and model it, is the impact of environmental toxins on human health. And we're just barraged by the number of compounds that we ingest or are exposed to through our skin or through what we breathe. And a lot of these are food products. If you're not purchasing organic food, they're sunscreens if you're not using the zinc oxide safe alternatives. There's so much emerging information about these toxins and how they impact our health that I hope that our students, through their own purchasing power choices and also their the public pressure on our regulators, that we could really close that link on, it's on how we can be healthier as a society by helping everybody have more safer choices. The Environmental Working Group is one nonprofit that I've supported that I think does really good work in that, which is characterizing, different toxins in different foods and different products. So I think the program is going to continue to evolve to really keep up with the changing challenges and onslaughts that we have as humans in this society, and that the students will continue to evolve solutions. Because that was, I should have mentioned that earlier. That was the reason I was drawn to this major, is that studying about the problems is great to raise awareness, but then designing the solutions is what is needed, and that's what keeps me here. And I think that's what our students also really are focused on.
Well, rounding up for a moment, you've both obviously are extremely committed, 20 years or so, each one of you. Terry, I'm going to start with you. If you could share some advice or words of wisdom with the audience, and it could be personal or professional, what would it be?
I would just say that everyone has the power to do something about this problem. I think a lot of people feel powerless, but they actually have quite a bit of power. In fact, for everything you do, you're in charge of it, really. I mean, ultimately, what you end up doing in your life is what you decide to do. And to become active, I think, is really the critical thing that needs to happen right now. We can't wait any longer. We can't wait around for other people to try to come up with these solutions. I think every person has to be part of this solution. And they have a lot more power than they realize. That's the thing. I think that's my advice. I think the other thing is one positive thing that's happened is we've had some degrowth in population, and primarily this is due to the education of women around the world. And this has been it's actually been a big benefit to not using too many resources. Supporting women in this process to be able to move forward is going to be another major aspect. And we are seeing some of this happen. But I think that my main thing is that we just take action and that we support the people that are going to move us forward to, again, we have about 7 years to do something about this. We can no longer wait. We have to all become active now.
And Caye, same question to you.
Yeah, I think Terry has really nailed it, that individual action is so crucial. So he was focusing mainly on climate change and energy use. And I think that's really within the scope of each individual to address. And I would like to expand it to also our own personal health. Be aware of what you're eating and what you're purchasing, and especially in the time of COVID, when we know that there are a number of health comorbidities that make you more at risk for severe disease, it seems like now is the perfect time to really take charge of your health. And that's going to have the impact on improving the environment too, because if you're consuming more vegetables and fruits that are organically produced, you're helping yourself, but you're also helping the environment. So again, this individual action and the cyclical nature that everything's interconnected, I think is what my suggestion would be, to focus on that.
Well, I echo your sentiments, and I'm going to end with the quote from your email, Caye. Oh. Above all, we must understand that in leaving the toxic ways of the present, we are healing ourselves, our places, and our planet. We rebel not as a last act of desperation, but as a first act of creation. It's Stan Smith.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
Thank you both very much, and I truly look forward to catching up with you again soon and seeing where the program is.
Awesome. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.